Snow drifted gently from a sky the color of ash, layering the world in hush. The chapel stood quiet now, its stained glass windows still glowing with faint candlelight, though the ceremony that never happened had long ended. The parking lot was empty. Only one figure remained. She sat on the stone steps in white, her dress pooled around her like melting frost, the hem soaked through with slush and ruin. Her bouquet, lilacs, baby's breath, and cream roses, lay wilted at her side, ribbon unraveling like a pulled promise. Mascara had smudged under her eyes, tear tracks cutting through foundation. Her lipstick was gone. Her hands trembled in her lap, wedding ring finger bare, though it had been fitted and polished just the day before. Grace didn't cry anymore. That part had already passed. What settled in her chest now wasn't pain. It was hollowness, a ringing quiet where hope had been. Across the street, a beat-up pickup truck idled, engine puffing fog into the crisp winter air. Inside, a boy watched, her from behind a frosted window. Big brown eyes, curious and steady. 7 years old, give or take, with a red knit hat that slipped slightly over one eyebrow. The driver, a man with worn hands and lines etched at the corners of his eyes, glanced. At her, then back at the boy. Their conversation was silent. The man didn't seem the kind to interfere. But the boy tilted his head, said something, and pointed. The man sighed, turned the key, and killed the engine. She was supposed to marry a man who promised her forever. Instead, she met the man who'd never promised anything, but gave her everything. The last car had driven away 20 minutes ago. Her father hadn't spoken a word, just clenched his jaw and left, shame flickering in his eyes like he'd been embarrassed by her body, her heart, or both. Grace leaned forward, the corset digging into her ribs, the fabric stiff from cold. She pulled at the hem, thread snapping. If she was going to sit in the snow like a ghost of some half-told fairy tale, she might as well look like one. She tugged again until it ripped, the lace catching like breath. Inside the chapel, someone had forgotten to extinguish the candles. She didn't look back. Enter Jack and Milo, the crunch of boots in snow. "Excuse me," came a voice, rough, low, careful. "You all right?" She didn't answer. He knelt a few feet away, arms resting on his knees. A man in flannel and denim, grease on his hands even now. His face was weathered, but not unkind. And behind him, peeking from the cracked open truck door, the boy. Grace looked past the man to the child. The boy waved. She didn't wave back. "I'm Jack, that's Milo," the man said. We saw you sittin'. Didn't feel right just driving past." Still, she didn't move. "You need a ride?" he asked, voice softer now. She stared at him. Her lip trembled only once. Then she nodded. The cab of the truck smelled like pine-scented air freshener and oil. Grace sat stiffly in the passenger seat, still in her dress. The torn hem lay across her lap like a crumpled napkin. She kept her eyes ahead. The boy Milo stared unabashedly from the back seat. "Were you getting married?" he asked. "Milo," Jack warned gently. "It's okay," Grace said, barely above a whisper. "I was." "Oh," Milo replied after a pause. "My mom got married too, but she's not around anymore." Grace turned her head slightly, met the boy's eyes in the mirror. "I'm sorry," she said. He just nodded, like he'd already made peace with things kids shouldn't have to understand. Jack's house was a cabin, really, tucked against the woods at the edge of town, smoke curling from the chimney, warm light glowing in one window like a candle in the dark. The inside smelled like wood and cinnamon and something lived in. A flannel blanket was tossed over the couch. Drawings, some scribbled, some careful, lined the fridge. Milo kicked off his boots. "I'll get the slippers," he declared, disappearing. Into a side hallway, Grace stood awkwardly by the door. "You don't have to stay long," Jack said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just figured you could warm up, maybe get out of that dress." Grace looked down at herself. The satin clung to her hips in a way that now felt vulgar, exposed. "I don't have any clothes," she murmured. "I'll get something," he replied, already moving toward a nearby basket of laundry. Milo returned with fuzzy pink slippers, obviously too small, with tiny embroidered hearts. He held them out proudly. "These were my mom's," he said. "You can borrow them." Grace blinked, then knelt. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching on the words like splinters. "The first night Jack made tea, herbal, something with lemon and warmth. He didn't ask questions. She didn't offer answers. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, just spacious." Grace showered. He left clothes outside the bathroom door, sweatpants and an oversized hoodie that smelled faintly of cedar and soap. The guest room was small but tidy, a single bed, a lamp with a floral shade. On the dresser, a snow globe with a farmhouse and swirling glitter, and the quilt, hand-stitched, faded, embroidered in the corner, "Love you always, Mom." Grace traced the words with her fingers. From the hallway, she heard Jack reading. And then the rocket ship flew all the way past Saturn, where the stars looked like diamonds in a black sea. His voice was low, deliberate. "And if you ever forget, I'll still be right here. Just like I promised. Love, Mom." Milo's voice sleepy and soft. "Night, Daddy." Jack. "Night, buddy." The door creaked shut. Footsteps. The couch creaked. Grace lay back in the bed. Her hair was still damp. She stared at the ceiling and let the silence wrap around her. Then quietly, tears. Not dramatic ones. Just the kind that leak out when your chest is too full of things no one else can see. And in the darkness, she whispered to no one at all. "Please don't make me leave." The snow settled deeper each day, like a secret being kept quiet beneath the surface of everything. Grace didn't leave. At first, she told herself it was temporary, just a day, maybe 2. But the days turned to 3, then 5, and then she stopped counting. Jack never asked her to stay, but he also never asked her to go. In the mornings, she beat him to the kitchen. She found his old cast-iron skillet and coaxed warmth from the stove like it was an offering. She didn't know where half the utensils were, and the pantry was a mismatched mess, but somehow it all worked. Bacon curled in its own grease. Pancakes browned unevenly, but tasted like Sunday mornings. She hummed a tune she couldn't remember, the name of Low and Soft, the way her mother used to when folding laundry. Milo sat at the table, legs swinging beneath the wood. He ate everything she made like it was the best thing that had ever touched his tongue. "Can you make this forever?" he asked one morning. Maple syrup streaked on his cheek. Grace laughed. "Forever's a long time." He looked at her, very serious. "It's not that long." The second Sunday after she arrived, Grace was digging through a drawer looking for a whisk when she found it. A worn, leather-bound cookbook, pages soft with age, corners curled like the wings of old letters. Inside were annotations in a tidy looping script. "Add vanilla if it's for Jack. He likes it that way. And Milo hates raisins. Skip them unless you want drama." She turned the page to an apple pie recipe. Grace baked it that afternoon. When it was done, she opened the book again and wrote softly in the margin, "Too much cinnamon, but maybe he'll like it that way." Later after dinner, Jack had a slice, then another. He said nothing. But when she walked past to clear the table, he looked up and said, "You wrote that in her book. I can take it out," she offered. He shook his head. "No, it's good that you did." When the snow reached halfway up the garden fence, Milo started begging to go sledding. Jack resisted at first. Too cold, too deep, too early. But Milo was persistent, so they bundled up. Milo in his red jacket, Jack in his canvas coat, and Grace in borrowed layers that didn't quite fit, but kept her warm anyway. They drove to the hill behind the fire station, where the slope was long and steep and almost too fast. Milo screamed with delight the whole way down. Jack held the sled steady. Grace clung to him and shrieked when they hit a bump, tumbling into the snow. She landed hard, and then she laughed. Full and wide and startled by her own voice, Jack offered her a hand. He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her, like she was the most unexpected thing he'd seen in a long time, told her more than any words could. That night, they sat by the fire after Milo had gone to bed. Grace curled on one end of the couch, a blanket around her legs. Jack sat in the armchair, one hand curled around a mug, his other scratching the back of his neck. "You gonna go back?" he asked. Grace stared into the flames. The crackle filled the room between words. "To what?" she finally said. "A man who left me because my hips are too wide in white satin? Because he said I looked like I was already someone's mother?" Jack didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "Milo thinks you're beautiful." Grace turned her head toward him, a small smile at the edge of her lips. "Milo's smarter than most men." Jack's eyes held hers a beat too long. He looked away first. Outside, snow tapped the windows like fingers on glass. Inside, something delicate, new, and quiet settled between them. Not yet love, not even a promise, just understanding. The ice on the driveway melted slow, leaving little rivers that ran toward the woods. Roofs dripped all day. Even the wind softened, trading its bite for something gentler. Spring hadn't fully arrived, but it was close enough to be felt. Like a breath before waking. One Sunday, Jack packed up the old truck with a thermos of coffee, a fishing pole, and a brown paper bag of sandwiches. He didn't say where they were going. Grace sat in the passenger seat, Milo in the back with his dinosaurs and a book about bugs he never read. They ended up at a quiet lake Jack said his wife used to love. The water was still edged with ice around the banks, but in the center, it shimmered open and free. Pines stood like sentinels around the water, their reflections trembling just enough to make the world feel fragile. Milo tried to fish but got bored quickly. Grace showed him how to find flat stones and flick them sideways across the water. He tried once, twice, plop, plop, then the third skipped twice before sinking. He gasped and turned to her. "Mom would have loved you." Jack, kneeling near the tackle box, stilled. Grace didn't speak. She just reached down and took Milo's small, cold fingers in hers and gave them the gentlest squeeze. Jack didn't look up, but she knew he heard. His shoulders moved with a breath he hadn't meant to take. Later that week, the tractor broke. Again. Jack muttered and dragged it halfway out the shed, cursing under his breath in a voice too tired to sound angry. Grace stood watching, then stepped forward and offered her hands. He hesitated. "You ever rebuilt a carburetor?" he asked. "Nope, but I can hold a wrench and follow orders." So she did. Their hands got greasy. She laughed when she dropped a bolt in the grass, and he laughed too. A real laugh, low and sudden like thunder in a clear sky. They leaned in at one point, just to examine the same part, just to get a better look, and their foreheads brushed. Barely, just enough to make both of them still. She didn't move away. Neither did he. But there was no kiss. Just the echo of one not taken, an ache neither of them knew how to name. That night, Grace's phone rang. She didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. The voice that followed made her breath hitch. "Gracie, I don't know what I was thinking. We can try again. I made a mistake." She listened twice, then 3 times. She didn't respond. Instead, she sat outside under the stars until they paled against the rising sun. She was barefoot. Dew clung to her hem and laced her toes in cold. Jack found her like that, hands around her knees, eyes rimmed red. The phone was beside her, face down. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, then she whispered it. "Why'd he leave me, Jack?" His answer came slow from somewhere deep. He didn't know what he had. Then, after a beat, "But I see you." She looked up. Not at the sky this time. At him. And he meant it. Later that week, Grace found the old quilt again, the one in the guest room, stitched with love and memory, fraying at the edges. She threaded a needle and mended a tear near the corner, and then, without planning to, She added a tulip, small, purple, tucked beside a faded star. Nothing loud, nothing bold, just hers. When Milo saw it, he touched the soft petals with reverence. "Did you do that?" She nodded. Can you add my name someday, like Mom did?" Grace swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. "Yeah," she said, "if you want me to." He grinned and ran off to play. The quilt, folded at the foot of her bed, had never felt more like home. The storm arrived with no warning, just a sudden hush in the air before the sky cracked open. The lights blinked once, twice, then died. Milo squealed, not in fear, but wonder. Jack reached for the flashlight in the drawer, but Grace was already lighting the candles. The fire in the hearth hissed softly, casting their shadows wide and golden. The power was gone, but warmth lingered. Grace told a story as she rubbed Milo's damp hair dry with a towel. "When I was little," she said, "every time the lights went out, my mom would light candles in the kitchen, and then she'd dance with me like we were in some fancy ballroom." "Did you wear a dress?" Milo asked, grinning. "Always," she said, twirling in her socks, "even if it was just pajamas." And then she did it. She danced, right there, barefoot on the old wooden floor, arms up, humming a tune only she knew. Milo joined first, mimicking her silly spins and bumps. Jack stayed seated for a while, just watching. Then, without a word, he stood. He stepped in awkwardly. Clunky boots, calloused hands. And she met him there. They danced not like strangers pretending to fit, but like people whose hearts had been quietly moving toward each other for a long, long time. The fire cracked. The wind howled. Inside, the three of them swayed. Days passed. Spring crept closer. Milo came home from school one afternoon with a crumpled paper. "It's for my project," he said, laying it out like treasure. It was a drawing, 3 stick figures. One tall, one small, one in a triangle dress with long yellow hair. Around them, a red heart. "My family," it read in shaky letters. Jack saw it when he passed through the kitchen. He didn't speak, just smiled, faint and stunned. That night, he left a tulip, just like the one Grace had stitched, on her pillow. She found it after brushing her teeth, hands still damp. Her fingers trembled a little when she picked it up. The next day, she began packing. Not everything, just a few folded clothes, toothbrush, socks. Jack stood in the doorway. "You leaving?" She zipped the bag halfway, then stopped. "I was going to," she said. "Thought I should before I get too used to this, before I call it mine." Jack didn't flinch. "And now?" she swallowed. "I don't want to." He stepped forward. "Then stay. Not just tonight." The kiss wasn't sudden. It had been growing for weeks, in glances, silences, soft things never said aloud. When it came, it was slow, gentle, a promise made without rings or ribbons. Outside, the snow began again, soft as breath. April or not, it fell. Morning came. Grace stood at the stove, wearing the slippers Milo had given her. The smell of pancakes filled the air. Jack leaned in the doorway with his coffee, watching the curve of her back, the way she hummed that same old tune under her breath. Milo rushed in, a backpack slung crooked over one shoulder. "Mom, we're gonna be late." He didn't pause, didn't correct himself. She froze for a heartbeat, then turned with a smile. "Then we better get moving." Jack didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His smile said everything. On the guest bed, their bed now, the quilt lay smoothed and whole. In one corner, 3 names stitched close: Grace, Jack, Milo. The final thread pulled tight beneath morning light. She never walked down the aisle. But she found a home, a son, and a love stitched into morning light. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter,